The industrial district of Blackridge never slept. Its streets were covered in dust, its buildings carried decades of rust, and its people had learned to survive with very little. Among them lived 25-year-old Evelyn Hart, a mechanic whose hands were usually stained with grease and whose reputation was built on one simple truth: she never allowed anyone to bully the weak. After losing her parents as a teenager, Evelyn had spent years raising her younger brother and keeping her small garage alive. The neighborhood respected her because she fought for people who could not fight for themselves. In Blackridge, courage was rare, and hers seemed almost reckless. That courage was tested on a cold afternoon when a convoy of black vehicles rolled into the district. Everyone recognized the symbol painted on the doors: the Voss Empire. The men who stepped out carried weapons and cold expressions. They announced that the old warehouse at the end of the street now belonged to Damien Voss, the most feared Mafia king in the country. The warehouse sheltered several struggling families, and within minutes fear spread through the crowd. One by one, people lowered their heads. Everyone except Evelyn. She stepped forward, wiping grease from her hands, and demanded to know why innocent families were being thrown onto the streets. The armed men stared at her in disbelief. No one questioned the Voss Empire and lived comfortably afterward. A chilling silence covered the street. Then another car arrived. Damien Voss himself stepped out. The sight of him made people retreat. Stories about him had become legends. Entire organizations had disappeared after crossing him. Yet Evelyn did not move. A poor mechanic stood face to face with the most dangerous man in America, refusing to bow. Damien studied her carefully. There was no hatred in her eyes and no desperation. There was only fearlessness, something he had not seen in years. For reasons even he did not understand, he raised his hand and ordered his men to lower their weapons. As he returned to his car, his gaze remained fixed on the woman standing in the middle of the street, and a quiet command left his lips: "Find out everything about Evelyn Hart." The order to investigate Evelyn Hart should have been routine. Damien Voss had asked for information on thousands of people during his reign, and most of those names were forgotten within hours. Yet this one remained in his thoughts. By the next morning, a thick file rested on his desk. Evelyn had lost both of her parents in a factory accident when she was 16. Instead of leaving the city, she had abandoned her own dreams and worked endless jobs to raise her younger brother Noah. She repaired engines during the day and studied mechanical manuals at night until she could afford to open her small garage. There were no wealthy relatives, no powerful connections, and no hidden ambitions. Only sacrifice. Damien closed the file but did not push it away. For the first time in years, a stranger occupied his mind. He had built an empire through fear. Politicians, businessmen, and rival gang leaders trembled at the mention of his name. Yet a woman who owned nothing had looked directly into his eyes without hesitation. The city's most feared criminal could not stop thinking about the one woman who had openly challenged him. Days passed, and his curiosity became something deeper. He began driving through Blackridge for reasons he could not explain. From the dark windows of his car, he watched Evelyn work beneath broken neon lights, laughing with customers and helping elderly neighbors carry groceries. She seemed untouched by the darkness that surrounded him. Meanwhile, Evelyn started noticing unfamiliar luxury cars parked near her garage. The vehicles never stayed long, but they always returned. Rumors quickly spread through the neighborhood. Some claimed the Mafia king wanted revenge. Others whispered that Damien Voss had taken a dangerous interest in her. Evelyn ignored the gossip. She had too many responsibilities to waste time worrying about stories. Far away from her world, Damien sat alone in his penthouse, staring at her file once again. The feeling growing inside him was unfamiliar and deeply unsettling. For the first time in his life, he questioned whether fear was the only thing connecting him to other people. That night, after closing her garage, Evelyn walked home through the quiet streets of Blackridge. As she reached her front door, she suddenly stopped. A small black box was waiting on the steps. The black box remained untouched for several minutes. When Evelyn finally carried it inside and lifted the lid, her expression changed instantly. Inside lay a collection of expensive jewelry and bundles of cash that could have paid her bills for years. No note, no explanation, only wealth. She immediately thought of one name: Damien Voss. No one else in the city would leave such an extravagant gift on the doorstep of a mechanic from Blackridge. For a brief moment, she considered how much easier life could become with that money. Her garage struggled every month, and her brother's college expenses continued to grow. But the thought disappeared almost immediately. Nothing from a man like Damien came without a price. The next morning, she packed everything back into the box and sent it to the Voss estate through a delivery service. The reaction inside Damien's mansion was something none of his men had ever witnessed. He stared at the returned box in complete silence. Business leaders had begged for his attention. Powerful families had fought for his favor. No one had ever rejected anything he offered. Yet Evelyn Hart had sent it back without hesitation. Instead of anger, an unfamiliar feeling settled inside him. His interest in her only deepened. Across the city, however, other eyes had begun to notice. The rival criminal organization known as the Moretti family had been monitoring Damien's movements for weeks. Their leader found it impossible to ignore the reports about the mysterious woman from Blackridge. People feared being noticed by Damien Voss because his attention often brought destruction. Rejecting the Mafia king's gift had become even more dangerous than accepting it. The Morettis reached a troubling conclusion. If Damien was interested in Evelyn, then she might be the first weakness he had ever shown. And weaknesses could be exploited. Completely unaware of the danger surrounding her, Evelyn continued her ordinary life. She repaired engines, argued with suppliers, and laughed with her neighbors, never realizing that powerful men were discussing her fate behind closed doors. Several evenings later, she locked the doors of her garage and stepped onto the empty street. The city seemed unusually quiet. Then headlights appeared. A black van slowly pulled to a stop beside her. The door of the black van slid open before Evelyn could react. Two masked men stepped out and grabbed her. She fought with everything she had, but within seconds she was forced inside the vehicle. The van disappeared into the night, leaving the street silent. Miles away, news of the kidnapping reached the Voss estate. For the first time in years, Damien Voss lost control. The glass in his hand shattered as he listened to the report. The Moretti family had taken Evelyn, believing she could be used against him. A terrifying calm settled over him. Then the hunt began. Every warehouse, nightclub, and hidden safehouse connected to the Morettis was searched. Men who had worked for the rival family for decades suddenly vanished. The city woke to burning buildings and abandoned streets. The ruthless Mafia king was willing to burn an entire city to save one woman. Rumors spread like wildfire. People who had never feared war before locked their doors and stayed inside. They had never seen Damien act with such fury. Meanwhile, Evelyn was held inside an old factory near the river. Her captors spoke openly around her, convinced she was merely a tool. Only then did she understand something terrifying. Her life had become tangled with a man whose power could shake an entire city. Hours later, explosions echoed in the distance. The guards grew nervous. They knew exactly what those sounds meant. Damien Voss was coming. Instead of waiting for his men, Damien personally led the rescue mission. He moved through the factory like a storm, leaving destruction behind him. By the time he reached the final room, the guards had either fled or surrendered. He found Evelyn sitting in the corner, exhausted but unharmed. For a brief second, relief crossed his face. Then he noticed something on the floor. A small silver ring. It carried the symbol of the Voss Empire. Damien slowly picked it up, and his expression darkened. The kidnapping had not been planned by the Morettis alone. Someone from inside his own empire had betrayed him. The silver ring in Damien's hand belonged to only one man, Victor Kane. For nearly 15 years, Victor had served as Damien's closest advisor. He had helped build the Voss Empire and had earned a level of trust few people ever received. The discovery felt like a knife to the heart. Within hours, the mansion turned into a battlefield of suspicion. Loyal soldiers chose sides, and accusations echoed through the halls. The empire that had once appeared unbreakable began to crack from within. Damien finally located Victor in an abandoned warehouse on the edge of the city. The truth was worse than he expected. Victor believed Evelyn had changed him. He had watched the ruthless king risk his empire, start a war, and abandon reason for a woman from Blackridge. In Victor's eyes, Damien was becoming weak, and weakness would eventually destroy everything they had built. Before Damien could stop him, Victor escaped into the darkness. The internal war had officially begun. Back at the Voss estate, Evelyn found herself in a world she barely understood. Armed guards stood outside every room, and servants lowered their heads whenever Damien passed by. Everyone feared him. No one loved him. As she watched him move through the mansion, she noticed something she had never seen before. Loneliness. The most powerful man in the city had spent his entire life completely alone. People obeyed his commands, protected his empire, and followed his orders without question, yet not a single person truly cared about the man behind the title. For the first time, Evelyn looked beyond the reputation and saw someone carrying a burden too heavy for one person. Damien, meanwhile, seemed exhausted. The betrayal of his closest friend had left a wound that power could not heal. Without realizing it, Evelyn's feelings toward him began to change. The man she once viewed as a dangerous criminal now seemed deeply human. And Damien found unexpected comfort in her presence. Neither of them understood what was growing between them. Late that night, one of Damien's guards entered the room carrying an envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper. There were only 7 words written across it. Evelyn Hart will die before sunrise. The message promising Evelyn's death changed everything inside the Voss estate. Damien immediately ordered extra guards to prepare a secure route out of the city. He wanted Evelyn far away from the war that was growing within his empire. Any connection to him had become a danger. But when the plan was presented to her, she refused. Running had never been part of Evelyn Hart's nature. Instead of leaving, she chose to stay. For the first time, she stepped deeper into Damien's world and entered the heart of the Voss mansion. The place looked less like a home and more like a fortress. Armed men stood in every corridor, security screens covered entire walls, and urgent reports of attacks and betrayals arrived every hour. She finally witnessed the true reality of his empire. Power came with endless enemies. Trust was almost impossible, and every day could be someone's last. Damien tried repeatedly to push her away. He insisted that she deserved a normal life, one untouched by blood and violence. Keeping her close would only place a target on her back. Yet Evelyn refused to abandon him. The woman who had once challenged the Mafia king in the middle of a street had now become the only person standing beside him. As the days passed, she remained at the mansion, helping calm frightened staff members and offering support during the growing crisis. Her presence slowly changed the atmosphere around Damien. For years, he had buried every emotion that made him vulnerable. Regret, grief, and hope had all been locked away behind the image of a ruthless king. Now those feelings were beginning to return. He found himself looking for her in crowded rooms and feeling strangely at peace whenever she was near. The realization frightened him. Losing Evelyn would hurt far more than losing money, power, or even his empire. One evening, while searching through old records that might reveal Victor's plans, Evelyn entered the mansion's private library. A dusty file had fallen from a shelf and landed at her feet. Curious, she opened it. Inside were newspaper clippings and investigation reports from nearly 20 years earlier. At the center of every document was one familiar name: her father. As she turned another page, her face slowly lost all color. The file suggested that her father's death might somehow be connected to the Voss family itself. The file in Evelyn's hands felt heavier than stone. According to the old reports, her father had once worked for a company secretly controlled by Damien's late father, Alexander Voss. Several witnesses had claimed that her father discovered illegal operations involving smuggling and money laundering. Days later, he died in what authorities called a factory accident. For years, Evelyn had believed her parents' deaths were a cruel tragedy. Now they looked like something far darker. Heartbroken and confused, she locked herself inside the library. Every memory of her childhood suddenly carried new meaning. The people responsible for her suffering might have been connected to the man she had slowly begun to trust. When Damien learned about the file, he immediately started his own investigation. The deeper he searched, the more horrifying the truth became. His father had indeed committed terrible crimes years earlier. Powerful people had been silenced, and innocent families had suffered to protect the Voss Empire's secrets. Among those victims was the Hart family. Damien stood alone in his office for hours, unable to escape one painful thought. The woman he loved had every reason to hate him. For the first time, he found himself facing an impossible choice. He could hide the truth and protect his family's legacy, or he could confess everything and risk losing the only person who truly understood him. By sunrise, he had made his decision. He told Evelyn everything. He admitted that his family name had been built on terrible actions and accepted responsibility for the pain his father had caused. He offered no excuses and asked for nothing in return. Evelyn listened in silence. Then she walked away. Hours passed. Then an entire day. No one could find her. Her room was empty, and her phone had been left behind. She had disappeared without leaving a single message. Panic returned to the Voss estate. As Damien prepared another search, one of his guards rushed into the office carrying a newly delivered envelope. Inside was a photograph of Evelyn. On the back, a sentence had been written in black ink. "I have the girl, and this time you will learn who truly destroyed both of your families." The photograph led Damien to an abandoned estate outside the city. Inside, he finally came face to face with the man responsible for years of suffering, Victor Kane. But the betrayal ran far deeper than anyone had imagined. Victor confessed that he had manipulated both the Voss and Hart families for decades. He had fueled old rivalries, arranged false evidence, and even played a role in the events that led to the deaths of Evelyn's parents. His goal had always been the same: to control the Voss Empire from the shadows. Evelyn, bound inside the estate, listened in horror as the truth unfolded. Everything she believed about her past had been carefully engineered by one man's greed. A violent battle erupted as Victor's remaining followers attacked. Gunfire echoed through the building, and chaos spread through every room. At the center of it all stood Damien. For years, revenge had guided every decision in his life. Yet when Victor tried to escape by using Evelyn as a shield, Damien made a choice no one expected. He lowered his weapon. The Mafia king was willing to give up his empire, his power, and even his revenge to save the woman who had once challenged him. The hesitation gave Evelyn enough time to break free, and Damien's men finally overpowered Victor and his followers. The nightmare was over. As police sirens approached in the distance, Evelyn finally learned the complete truth. Her parents had been victims of a conspiracy that stretched back decades, and Damien had never been her enemy. For the first time in many years, both of them felt free. In the weeks that followed, Damien shocked the entire underworld. He dismantled large parts of the Voss Empire, closed illegal operations, and walked away from the life that had defined him. Power no longer mattered. Some things were worth more than an empire. Evelyn became the first person to change the heart of a feared king and show him that redemption was possible. Together, they decided to leave the city behind and begin a new life far from violence and secrets. But on the morning of their departure, a final envelope arrived. Inside was a single piece of paper. Only one sentence had been written on it. "The Voss Empire's darkest secret has only just begun."